I remember the way the snow sounded that morning like nothing, like the world had been muted. No birds, no wind, just white pressing in on all sides. I was 31 when I stepped out of the rental Jeep, but the moment my boots hit that snow, I felt 13 again. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments, and if stories like this have ever touched your family, hit like and subscribe. Every click helps bring forgotten names back into the light. The seam in the wall wouldn't leave my mind. I stared at that photo for a long time, my grandfather's elbow partially covering what now looked unmistakably like the outline of a door. When I finally pulled my eyes away and looked back at the real wall, nothing. Just solid timber and built-in bookshelves. I tried tapping the wood in different places, listening for hollows, but the whole thing felt secure. I stood there longer than I meant to, arms crossed over my chest, cold air curling in from the front door that hadn't quite closed all the way. Something about that moment, it felt like the house was watching me, not in a haunted way, just aware. Like it had been waiting. I didn't unpack, not yet. I wandered instead, letting my steps follow the old patterns. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee and mildew. The brass clock on the wall remained frozen at 2:46 a.m., even after I'd put in fresh batteries. That was the time the power had supposedly gone out, the time everything stopped. I walked down the narrow hallway that led to the back bedrooms. The air was still. The floor creaked in the same places. But now I noticed things I didn't. Back then, thin scratches along the baseboards like something had been dragged. I paused outside the second door. That had been the kids' room. I pushed it open slowly. It smelled like old pine and dust. The twin beds were still made. One had a faded baseball quilt folded over the footboard, the other a patchwork blanket Lila used to call her sleep square. I walked to the window. Frost laced the glass in spiderweb patterns. On the sill, a baseball glove stiff with time, and below the frame, just barely peeking out from under the bed, a small red shoe. I reached down, hesitated, then picked it up. On the sole-faded black marker, Ben. My breath caught. I had written that myself, all caps, shaky lines. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress exhaling dust beneath me. I remembered sitting there after they disappeared, surrounded by officers and search dogs repeating the same thing again and again. They didn't leave. They didn't leave. No one listened. I leaned forward to put the shoe back, but a corner of the rug near the nightstand was curled up. I tugged it gently. Underneath wooden planks. One of them looked wrong, too narrow, the edge uneven. I pressed my fingers along the seam. It gave slightly. I pulled again. The board lifted with a long creak, and a gust of air came up from below, cold, sharp, older than anything in the house. My hand found a metal ring recessed into the next panel. I gripped it and pulled. Hinges groaned. Dust exploded upward. Beneath was a hole, crude stairs carved out of earth and wood. My phone light cut into the darkness, catching the glint of damp stone before being swallowed whole. I didn't call anyone. I didn't run. I just whispered into the dark, Grandpa. And then soft, barely audible, a child's laugh. Familiar. My body froze, but my heart kept hammering. I backed up, shut the trapdoor, replaced the rug, and walked out of the room like it hadn't happened. That night I sat by the fire, the red blanket over my legs, the cassette player turning slowly in my lap. I had found it earlier while digging through an old box in the hall closet. It was labeled in Grandpa's handwriting, December 2007, Do not play. I pressed play anyway. There was static first. Then his voice, tired, steady, quiet. If you're hearing this, I didn't make it. And neither did they. This place isn't what you think it is. There's more underneath. I built it to protect them. But I think it's become something else. If she's listening, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I had to. The tape clicked off. I sat completely still. I rewound it, pressed play again. This time I listened closer, not to him, but to the sounds behind him. There was something. Low, muffled. Children, laughing. And behind the laughter, a voice. Mine. I stared at the floor beneath my feet. That tunnel wasn't just something I'd discovered. I had known about it. I had been down there. I had forgotten. Or maybe I had made myself forget. At some point during the night, I moved back to the bedroom, sat on the same bed, the red shoe in my lap. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. The house creaked and sighed in the wind. Shadows moved across the walls like they were trying to get out. Just before dawn, I returned to the hallway closet and opened another box. Inside, beneath a broken snow globe and an old music box, I found a bundle of papers and cassette tapes. I pulled out a yellowed envelope. Inside was a map drawn in Grandpa's hand. The cabin was at the center. Beneath it, 3 labeled tunnels, T1, T2, and T3. The one under the kids' room was T1. The second under the living room. The third under the shed. I folded the map and slid it into my jacket. I was wide awake now. But the house still felt like it was sleeping. The second tunnel would take some work. I'd have to rip up flooring. The third was probably buried under ice and old lumber. But I didn't care. I wasn't going home until I knew what was really under this house. I picked up the Polaroid from the mantel again. This time I studied it closer. The crack in the wall, the seam, and something else. Tucked behind Grandma Betty's shoulder, almost hidden in shadow, a small rectangle metal on the floor. A hatch, just like the one I'd opened. It had been right there all along. We had smiled in front of it, played board games above it, slept beside it, and no one had ever seen it. Or maybe someone had. I pressed the photo back into its frame. Then I turned toward the living room. The second tunnel was waiting. And this time, I wasn't waiting for courage. I was already under. The floorboards in the living room were harder to pry up than I expected. I worked slowly, stripping back layers of wood until my hands ached from the cold and effort. Underneath the rug and beneath a loose plank near the hearth, I found a second panel. This one cut cleaner, the edges reinforced with metal brackets. It had been sealed deliberately. I used the claw end of a hammer to loosen the bolts one by one. When the final screw gave way, a low creak, followed by the smell, hit me, earth-damp insulation and something sour beneath it. I paused, knees against the floor, flashlight clutched in my hand before pulling the door open. Below was a narrow shaft of stone and timber descending at a sharper angle than the first. I lowered myself in slowly, the beam from my phone light bouncing off moisture-streaked walls. These stairs were slick, carved crudely, the kind of work you do when you're building something meant to disappear. At the bottom, the tunnel stretched out only a few yards before ending in a blank stone wall. But that wasn't what stopped me. On the wall, in black charcoal, someone had written a date, 12/03/07. Beneath it, in uneven handwriting, the words, "Still here. Not safe yet." And just below those words, smeared against the wall in a half circle, were what looked like fingerprints, small-spaced like a child's. I touched one. It flaked slightly. Rust. Or maybe not. I backed away. Something about the way the tunnel breathed didn't sit right. I didn't stay long. I climbed out, resealed what I could, and sat back on the couch for a while, staring at the fire, thinking about that writing, those prints, and how calm that sentence had sounded. Not safe yet. Not yet. It was dark outside by then, the trees standing like quiet sentinels beyond the windows. I reached for my phone and scrolled until I found Samantha's number. My sister answered on the third ring. Claire. Her voice was groggy, or maybe just guarded. "I'm at the cabin," I said. Silence. Then Jesus. Claire, why would you do that? I told her I'd found something. A tunnel, she said, then sighed. Please don't do this again. We've lived through it already. No, I said quietly. We survived it. She didn't respond right away, just the sound of her breathing. I waited. Then she asked, Did you find the Polaroid? My fingers tensed around the phone. Why? Another pause. Because I remember something from that night. My heart beat louder. I heard Grandpa say, Get her out of here. Then the door shut. I thought I dreamt it. I leaned forward. You never told anyone I thought you needed me to forget. After we hung up, I stepped outside for air. The snow had slowed and the yard was blanketed in untouched white. But near the firewood pile, I saw it one single footprint. Small. No trail before or after. Just one perfect print facing the house. I walked toward it, slowly, stopped a few feet away. My breath clouded in front of me. It didn't look fresh. It looked like it had been there longer than the storm. But it hadn't melted. I went back inside and locked the door. That night, I didn't sleep again. 2 days later, I drove into town. Truckee looked almost the same old storefronts, faded signs, Christmas garlands still looped around the street lamps, even though it was well past New Year's. I stopped at the general store. The man behind the counter was older white beard flannel shirt. He looked up when the bell rang. Help you? He said. I nodded. I'm looking for anything you might remember about my grandparents, Walter and Betty Halden. His eyes narrowed. Halden. The cabin folks. I nodded again. He exhaled through his nose. Didn't think anyone'd come back after what happened. I told him I'd inherited the place. He just looked at me. You were the girl, right? The one they found outside? I nodded softer this time. After a moment, he leaned in slightly. Some folks think they never really left. He looked over his shoulder, then lowered his voice. Walter wasn't right, you know. Always talking about how the government was watching him. He told me once he had plans. Said if things ever went bad, he could hide the whole family underground. I stared at him. Did you ever tell the police that? He shrugged. No one listens to old men talking crazy. Back at the cabin, I opened another box from the attic. Letters, some receipts, a few yellowing maps. Inside one journal, I found a page folded twice. When I opened it, a note fell out. The handwriting was my grandfather's. If you're reading this, the plan failed. I couldn't protect them. The tunnel wasn't enough. I unfolded the map tucked behind it. 3 tunnels again. T1, T2, and one I hadn't found yet, T3. The third entrance appeared to be under the old tool shed out back. That night, I couldn't shake the sound of Samantha's voice or that footprint by the woodpile. I lay awake listening to the wind, wondering what else I had missed. I remembered something then, not a memory, more like a feeling. The way my grandfather had measured everything. Every drawer labeled, every jar cataloged. When I was a kid, I thought it was just his habit. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I pulled out the cassette player again, rewound the tape. This time I listened not just to what he said, but how he said it. The pauses, the background noise. There, near the end, just under his breath, he whispered something else. You'll remember when it's time. I pressed pause. My hand stayed on the recorder. I wasn't sure if I felt closer to the truth or further from it. All I knew was that something in this house had waited long enough. And I wasn't the only one hearing it move. My name is Claire Halden. I'm an architect from Reno, Nevada. Most of my adult life has been spent working on old buildings, restoring what time tried to erase. But there's one place I never expected to return to. The Halden cabin sat 26 miles outside of Truckee, up near the old logging trails. My grandfather Walter built it himself back in the 80s. He said he wanted a place that didn't need roads or neighbors or interference. Every board, every beam was his. Growing up, we spent long weekends there, fishing puzzles, cocoa by the fire. I remember the smell of pine and smoke in the curtains, the wood creaking under bare feet, the way Grandma Betty always folded the same red wool blanket over the couch arm like a habit she couldn't break. The winter of 2007 was the last time I saw any of them. Grandpa Walter, Grandma Betty, and my cousins Ben and Lila. I was supposed to be the big cousin, the one in charge. But by the end of that week, I was the only one who came back. What happened at that cabin made headlines for about a month. Search crews, helicopters, dogs. Then the snow kept falling and people moved on. I didn't. After they vanished, I was found outside in the snow face down near the woodshed barefoot and unconscious. I barely survived. After that, I was sent to live with my mother's sister in Sacramento. I never went back. Until this winter. It started with a letter. From the county office addressed to Claire Halden, misspelled. Inside was the deed to the cabin. My mother, Diane, had passed 2 weeks earlier. I was there holding her hand in hospice. She couldn't speak much near the end, but she'd managed one final sentence before the breath left her. It wasn't the storm, Claire. It was the tunnel. That's why I came back. Not for closure, not to mourn, to find the tunnel. The place hadn't changed. The same gray shingles, the same chipped porch rail. A crust of snow along the window panes like icing on a cake no one dared cut. When I pushed the door open, the smell hit me all at once. Smoke, dust, a metallic edge that didn't belong. Everything was exactly where it had been. The old recliner. The brass clock in the kitchen frozen at 2:46 a.m. The photo above the mantel us five bundled up in snow gear. Ben had a chocolate smear on his cheek. Lila's gloves were mismatched. Grandpa had his arms crossed like always. I was standing dead center, unsmiling. I hadn't remembered that detail, but something else was off too. Behind Grandpa's elbow in the photo, there was a dark seam in the wood wall. A line, like the edge of a door. I looked up from the frame. The real wall seamless, covered in built-in bookshelves. No door. But that line was there in the photo, and my hand, God help me, started to shake. The map had shown 3 tunnels, but the third one, the one labeled T3, looked like it branched under the old tool shed, the structure leaning sideways, now half swallowed by snow and time. I waited until the afternoon sun melted just enough ice to make digging possible. I pulled back the warped boards that had once served as a floor, uncovering a patch of ground packed tighter than the rest. It took hours, but just as the light began to shift to that late winter gray, my shovel struck wood. It wasn't like the other hatches. This one was recessed deeper, its edges reinforced with steel brackets that had gone orange with rust. There were no hinges, just a bolt on either side. I pried them loose with a crowbar I'd brought up from the truck. Beneath the door was a narrow shaft, steep steps, and cold air that rose up and caught in my throat. I called out, not really expecting anything. The only answer was my own breath. I climbed down. The tunnel was colder than the others, not just in temperature but in feeling. It opened into a wide chamber carved from stone, the walls damp, ceiling low. There were old mattresses along one wall, shelves lined with canned food, and in the corner a small shelf of children's books, spines worn down to soft ridges. In chalk on the wall, 6 tally marks. I stepped closer and ran my fingers across them. Each one neatly drawn. Someone had kept count. On the far wall, a name carved into the wood, Emily. My hand hovered over it, not quite touching. Then something shifted behind me. I turned fast, flashlight slicing through the dark, but no one was there. Just dust settling again. I backed toward the entrance, but my foot caught on something soft. I looked down. A stuffed rabbit. Torn ear. scorched on one side. Lila's. I picked it up slowly, turning it over in my hands. I remembered when she'd lost it under the couch, how she'd cried until Grandma helped her find it. I didn't take it with me. I placed it back down where I found it as gently as I could. The next morning I drove into town again. I didn't have a plan, just questions. I stopped by the old trail office hoping someone might still be working maintenance up by the pass road. A man stepped out of the garage, tall, mid-30s snow in his beard. "You Claire Halden?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He nodded once. "Mark Lewin. We were in the same 8th grade class. I remember you." I studied his face. Something clicked into place. "I need help digging," I said. "There's something under the cabin, something big." He didn't ask questions. We drove back up together and spent most of the afternoon clearing out debris around the cabin's perimeter. The third tunnel was deeper than the others, with thicker support beams and a second chamber just beyond the first. That's where we found the page, torn from a children's book, Peter Rabbit. The corner chewed. The image faded. We looked at each other, and neither of us said it out loud, but we both knew it hadn't been there long. On the back wall of the second chamber, a small blanket had been nailed across an opening. Behind it, another room. And on the wall, drawings, dozens of them, maybe more, all done in crayon. Trees, children, the cabin, the word home repeated in block letters. And in the middle of the room, lying neatly folded on the floor, a photo. Not one I'd seen before. Not old. In the image, Josh and Lila, older now, at least mid-20s, standing in front of the same chalk-covered wall I was staring at. I dropped to my knees. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Mark crouched beside me, staring over my shoulder. "This can't be real," he said. "They'd be what?" 24, 26. I nodded slowly. Josh would be 27. Claire. If this is recent. I didn't finish his sentence. I just kept staring at their faces. They weren't children anymore. Lila's eyes had shadows under them. Josh looked older than his age, but alive. Someone had taken this photo. Someone who had been with them. Someone who was still here. Mark stood and swept the flashlight across the wall again. On a small shelf we found a half-buried notebook. Its pages were crumpled, some smeared with damp or dust, but the writing was clear. "We can't leave one entry read. He says it's not safe. We hear them above us, but he says they don't look for us anymore. No name. No date. But I knew the handwriting. It was mine." I read the words again, slower this time, then closed the book. I felt the walls tilt. Mark didn't say anything. He just sat with me while I tried to breathe. After a long while, I whispered, "I don't remember writing this. Claire." He started but stopped himself. "I don't remember any of this." The silence that followed was dense. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself and closed my eyes. A sound surfaced then, not from memory but from inside me. A scent. Wood smoke. Sap. Metal. And then a voice. Calm. Male. "You can't go out there, Elle. It's too late." A second voice. Younger. "But it's morning. You said just one more night. You know the rule." Then my own voice, small. "They think we're dead." I opened my eyes, my heart pounding. It was real. I'd been there. After the night they vanished, I had been with them. I hadn't just survived, I had stayed. Mark was still beside me, watching. I looked at him. "I was part of it," I said. "I helped." He blinked. "Helped what?" "Helped hide them." I stood pacing now. My grandfather didn't fail to protect them. He hid them. From someone. From something. And I helped him. Mark followed me to the center of the chamber. I was shaking. I wasn't found outside the cabin by accident. I was placed there. Left there. By who he asked. I didn't hesitate. By me. That night, the wind howled harder through the eaves, and in the distance, just past the line of trees, a figure stood still beneath the moonlight. I couldn't see their face, but they raised one hand and waved. I didn't wave back. I turned and walked inside. The door clicked shut behind me. But I didn't feel alone. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I kept going over the notebook in my head, the words written in my own handwriting. The sentence I couldn't stop circling back to, "We can't leave." He says it's not safe. I must have read it 20 times trying to find something I hadn't seen, but all it did was confirm what I already knew. There was a version of myself that remembered everything, and she had left me behind. In the morning, I walked into the cabin's front room just as the snow started to fall again. Thin flurries drifting sideways, clinging to the window panes. I was making coffee when I heard a knock, not on the front door, but on the rear wall of the kitchen. 3 soft taps. I froze. There was no door on that side. Just cabinets. I stood still for a long time. Nothing else followed. Eventually, I poured the coffee and sat down. I didn't drink it. I just stared at the Polaroid photo on the mantel. The one with all of us in front of the cabin. Me, the kids, Grandma Betty, Grandpa Walter. And behind his elbow, that faint seam in the wood. A trap door we never talked about. I pulled the photo out of the frame again, holding it to the light. There, in the lower corner, something I hadn't noticed before. Tiny pencil marks numbers. A string of digits barely visible. I grabbed a pen and paper, copied them down. 39347 row, 120, 2040. Coordinates. I opened my phone, punched them in. It led to a clearing about 4 miles east of the cabin. Remote. No road. Just trees. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I texted Mark. He showed up an hour later in his truck, a shovel and thermos tossed in the back. We didn't say much, just drove. The trail narrowed fast, the trees pressing in tight on both sides. After a while, we had to stop and hike. My boots crunched softly through a mix of frozen ground and damp needles. I kept checking the phone to stay on course, and then, just ahead, Mark stopped. "There," he said. I looked up. In the snow was a small wooden marker barely visible. Weathered. Hand-carved letters across the surface. "Find her." My chest tightened. I knelt down and brushed snow away. Just below it, almost buried, a lockbox. I opened it slowly. Inside was a roll of undeveloped film, a child's mitten, a napkin folded into quarters, and a crayon drawing. The tunnel. 4 stick figures inside. One had an X scratched over the head. No names. No date. I held it up, hands shaking. Mark stared over my shoulder. "We need to develop that film," he said. The town still had a photo lab inside the hardware store. While we waited, we sat in the back booth of the diner, nursing coffee that had long gone cold. I stared out the window, trying not to think about what we might see. "Do you remember Ben?" I asked. Mark nodded. "He used to throw snowballs at me at recess. I'd complain, he'd just smile. I smiled faintly. He used to hum when he was nervous. I could hear it through the bedroom wall. "Do you still hear it?" Mark asked. I hesitated. "Last night, from the tunnel." When the film was ready, the clerk handed it over in a plain envelope. I opened it at the table. The first few photos were blurry shadows, stone walls, a table. Then came the one that stopped me cold. My grandfather standing inside the tunnel, holding a finger to his lips. Behind him, partially hidden in the dark, was me, staring directly into the lens. I wasn't scared. I wasn't unconscious. I was awake, alert, present. I had no memory of that moment. But there I was. Mark leaned in. "Claire, that's you." I nodded slowly. "I don't remember this. Any of it." I called Samantha again. This time she picked up right away. Her voice cracked before she even said hello. "I remember more now," she whispered. "I woke up that night. Dad was gone. I heard Mom say, 'We can't keep covering for him,' covering what I asked. She knew about the tunnels, about what Grandpa was doing." Her breath hitched. "And the kids. I think he took them down there. Why would he leave me outside? I don't think he did," she said. "I think you did." I stayed up late that night reading through everything again. My old drawings, Grandpa's notes, the pages of that notebook with my handwriting. Near midnight, I pulled on my coat and walked out to the tool shed. I didn't bring a flashlight. The path felt familiar now. My fingers found the edge of the hatch without searching. I climbed down the ladder. The tunnel air was thick and still. I moved slowly, the wall drawings blurring into color and shapes. In the second chamber, I stopped. The blanket was still there. So was the photo. But now, something else under the cot, half hidden by an old canteen. A second notebook. Torn pages. Scattered thoughts. One line circled in ink. "You promised to forget." I held it in my lap, sat on the floor, and let the quiet wrap around me. Somewhere above me, the wind moved through the trees. Somewhere behind me, I thought I heard humming. It came from deep in the tunnel, slow and steady. The sound of someone trying to stay calm. Someone who had been waiting a long time. I turned my head toward the dark, but didn't get up. Not yet. I just listened. And for the first time since I came back, I didn't feel like I was searching for them. I felt like they were searching for me. The next morning, I drove east past the edge of town through a stretch of trees that barely caught sunlight in winter. The road was narrow and cracked, the kind of place that didn't lead anywhere unless you were trying to disappear. I had called the only person I could think of who might have understood what I'd found Detective Ron Calhoun, the man who'd handled the original investigation in 2007. He answered on the second ring. "Still alive, I see," he said. His voice hadn't changed, dry and unhurried. I told him I had uncovered something beneath the cabin. He didn't ask what, he just told me where to meet him. His trailer sat off a service road between two pine lots just past the power station. When I pulled up, he was already outside, a thermos in one hand, a cigarette in the other. He looked smaller than I remembered, hunched into his coat as if age had folded him inward. He nodded at me, then led the way inside. The space smelled like burnt coffee and wood paneling. I sat at the table across from him while he poured 2 cups, no sugar, no milk. "You really went back there," he said, not looking at me. "I had to." "You shouldn't have had to," he muttered. Then he set his cup down and set it flat. "Your grandfather worked for the federal government in the 70s. Tunnels, shelters. Things we didn't have names for at the time. After he retired, he bought that land outside Truckee. Started digging again. Said he wanted to be ready for when things turned. I asked him if that had ever made it into the case files. He shook his head. Your dad made me promise not to. Said it would only make things worse. He knew I asked. He knew enough, Calhoun said. Knew your grandfather had built something down there. I tried to raise it once in the early days of the investigation. Got shut down. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no bodies. And you, he paused. You were found lying in the snow, barefoot. But no frostbite, no bruises, no trauma. It didn't add up then. Still doesn't now. He stood and pulled a box from under the cot in the corner. Inside were manila folders, photographs, old statements. He handed me a photo. It was us, me, Grandpa, Grandma, Ben, and Lila. The same photo that had hung above the cabin fireplace for years. except this one had something written on the back in faint pencil, a series of numbers, coordinates. I didn't tell him I had already been there. I didn't tell him about the photo we'd found in the tunnel, me and the kids older now alive. I just held the picture, hands steady, and said, "What do you think happened?" Calhoun looked at me, then leaned forward. "I think Walter Halden believed something was coming. I think he built a place to keep the family safe. But something changed. Maybe he got scared. Maybe he lost control. And I think you remembered more than you let on, even back then." I didn't argue. We sat in silence for a while. He didn't try to fill the space. Eventually I stood. "Thank you," I said. He nodded once. "If you go back down there, don't go alone." I left the trailer and drove straight back to the cabin. I didn't go inside right away. I stood out by the woodline for a while, watching the treetops shift in the wind. A crow circled overhead, just once, then gone. I walked the perimeter of the cabin again, checking for prints, any sign of movement. Nothing fresh. The snow had crusted over during the night. Inside, I unrolled the map again. Tunnels 1, 2, and 3. We had opened all of them, or so I thought. But something kept scratching at the back of my mind. In the notebook I'd found tucked under the cot, there'd been a line circled 3 times. We weren't supposed to stay this long. I sat on the living room floor tracing the lines of the map, looking for anything that didn't match the actual layout. And then I saw it. A faint square drawn just below Tunnel 2. Not labeled, not connected to any path. Just marked. A shape. A door. I pulled up the rug again. The floorboards there were newer than the others, replaced sometime after the original build. I tapped each one lightly. The 5th plank gave a hollow knock. I pried it up. Underneath wasn't dirt. It was metal. I cleared away dust and debris until I found a recessed handle. This hatch was smaller, narrower, with bolts on the outside. I undid them slowly. My breath held tight in my chest. When I opened it, the air that came out was still. Heavy. And then breathing. Just beyond the edge of my flashlight. Shallow. Human. I stepped back instinctively. Then a shape moved forward. Thin. Pale. Eyes like stone. It was Ben. Older. Face lean. Hair longer than I remembered. He stared at me for a long time before saying in a voice so small I almost didn't catch it, "I told you not to come back." I dropped to my knees. "Ben," I whispered. Another figure emerged behind him. Lila, grown, her face harder. Eyes narrowed with something that wasn't fear but something close. Recognition mixed with memory. "You remembered," she said. I nodded, barely breathing. "I didn't know." "You left," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it filled the space. "I thought I was helping," I said. "I thought I could bring someone back. I thought—" "You chose them," she said. "No," I said. "I chose survival." Ben spoke again, quieter now. "No one ever came." Footsteps sounded behind me. I turned. Mark stood at the top of the ladder, frozen in place. Ben tensed. "Who's that?" "A friend," I said. Lila didn't move. "There are no friends outside," she said. "Please," I said. "Let me explain. Let me make it right." There was a pause. Then Lila stepped aside. "Come in." The space behind them wasn't large. A single bulb hung from exposed wire. Crates lined one wall, a makeshift stove. Drawings still hung from thumbtacks in uneven rows. It was a life lived underground. "How long?" I asked. 18 years, she said, but we stopped counting after 10. I looked at Ben. He was staring at a corner of the room where a cot had been placed beside a stack of folded blankets. "Why didn't you leave?" I asked. "We tried," Lila said. "But they were watching. We weren't supposed to exist." I looked at her. "Who's they?" She didn't answer right away. "Grandpa said it would be safe again someday. That you'd come back." I felt my throat close. "He's gone, isn't he?" Lila nodded once. 10 years now. We buried him in the wall behind the third tunnel. He said you'd know what to do. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The grief in that moment wasn't new. It was old. Buried. Like everything else. We sat in silence while the wind above pressed against the cabin walls, and somewhere far off in the dark a soft humming started again. The same sound I'd heard through the floor for days. I looked toward it and didn't feel afraid, just unfinished. Ben stood near the back wall, shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the corner where the bulb swung slightly from its wire. Mark hadn't moved since stepping into the chamber, and I could tell he was still trying to process what he was seeing, what we were all seeing. I stayed beside Lila, who hadn't looked at me since we entered. Her arms crossed tightly, voice flat. "We didn't ask to come back," she said. "You did." I nodded. I needed to know what happened. "No," she said, "you needed to remember." There was a pause. Then she turned and walked to a section of the wall where a frayed blanket hung over uneven stone. She pulled it back. "There's something else you should see." Behind it, nestled against the rock, was a sheet-wrapped shape. The edges were tucked neatly under, and something about the way it had been placed, deliberate, careful, hit harder than I expected. Lila crouched beside it. 10 years ago. He didn't wake up. We couldn't move him. The tunnel was too steep and the ground was frozen. She placed a hand on the sheet. "We buried him here. He said you'd come, said you'd understand what needed to be done." I knelt beside her, reached out and touched the edge of the blanket. My hand didn't tremble. It just rested there. The air in the room thickened. No one spoke. The walls seemed to hold their breath. After a while, we stood and moved back into the main chamber. Lila and Ben walked slowly, their steps careful on the uneven floor. Mark opened one of the crates and found extra blankets. He handed one to Ben, who accepted it without a word. We sat near the old stove. Lila broke the silence first. "We weren't supposed to be down here that long. Grandpa said a few weeks, maybe a month. Just until it passed. Whatever it was. Do you know what he was hiding you from?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not at first. We were too young to question it. But later, I think it had to do with something he believed was coming. Something about watching. Listening." Ben looked up. He used to keep a radio on all night. Static, mostly. Sometimes he'd write things down. Numbers, phrases. Said we'd understand when we were older. "Did he ever say who was watching?" I asked. "Only that it wasn't safe up there," Lila said. "That the people looking for us weren't coming to help." I stared at the dirt-packed walls, at the faded crayon drawings, still pinned in uneven rows. One of them showed the cabin above ground, the tunnel below, and 4 figures. In another, there were only 3. A red X had been drawn through the 4th. I swallowed. "Why that drawing?" I asked. "Who drew it?" Lila didn't answer right away. Then she said, "You did." Her voice didn't carry blame, just memory. "You started drawing less after that, stopped eating too. That's when Grandpa decided it was time." "Time for what?" "To make you forget." My mind scrambled for an anchor. How? He had things, pills, tinctures. I don't know what they were. Said he'd used them before, to reset fear, That's what he called it. Resetting fear. Ben spoke again, softer this time. He didn't want to hurt us, but he didn't trust the world anymore. Said people had changed. Said they wouldn't understand why we stayed hidden. Lila nodded. He made you forget because you started asking too many questions. About the other tunnels, about what was real. I looked down at my hands. I left because I panicked. No, she said. You left because you remembered something he didn't want you to. We sat with that for a long time. Eventually I said, "What do you want now?" Lila didn't answer. Ben looked at her, then at me. "We want to be real again." I nodded. "Then come home." The silence that followed wasn't resistance. It was the slow thaw of time. Lila finally stood. "There's more you haven't seen." She led me to a narrower hallway carved deeper into the bedrock. At the end, behind a row of crates, was a small alcove with a metal cabinet. Inside were dozens of notes maps, journal entries, diagrams of the cabin, and beneath them, photographs. One showed the 5 of us gathered around the dinner table, plates full, faces calm. Another showed the trapdoor from above wide open with a rope ladder leading down. And then near the bottom of the stack, a single image I hadn't seen before. A man in uniform standing at the tree line just beyond the cabin, partially turned as if caught mid-step. His face blurred, but the posture, rigid alert, made my chest tighten. "He showed up once," Lila said. "Years ago. Grandpa said if he ever came back, we couldn't hesitate." "Do you know who he was?" "No," she said. "But Grandpa did. Called him by name. Told us to stay quiet until he left." I traced the edge of the photo. Something about it felt unfinished. The sky above the trees was dark in the picture, early evening or just before dawn. A sliver of frost on the ground. I slipped it into my pocket. Lila didn't object. We returned to the main chamber where Mark had built a small fire inside the stove. He handed us cups of weak coffee he'd made from a pouch we'd found in one of the crates. It tasted like ash, but it was warm. The kind of warmth you don't expect to miss. We made plans to return above ground before sunrise. The snow had stopped and the path back was clear. I gave Lila and Ben extra jackets. They hesitated at the tunnel entrance, blinking against the light. Then slowly they climbed the ladder. Their first time in daylight in nearly 2 decades. I followed them up. The cold air hit me first, sharp and wide. I looked around. The trees looked different, somehow shorter, older, and the cabin once looming now looked small. Ben and Lila stood still just outside the doorway, heads tilted back, eyes closed. Mark stood beside me, arms crossed. "You gonna tell anyone?" he asked. I didn't answer. Just watched the way the wind moved through the trees like it was clearing a space. I didn't know what would come next. I just knew the silence had finally changed. And something inside me, something buried for a long time, was finally starting to thaw. We didn't talk much that first day above ground. Ben and Lila stayed close to the windows, adjusting to the light in slow, cautious movements. Their eyes scanned everything, the chairs, the carpet, the way the cabin had been preserved and changed. I caught Lila brushing her hand along the edge of the mantel like she was testing the memory for cracks. Ben lingered near the stove, his shoulders tightening every time a gust of wind pressed against the wall. Mark kept his distance, mostly in the kitchen, quietly moving things aside so they could sit. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The silence between all of us was full. We gave them clothes. Lila wore one of my old jackets, too short in the sleeves, and Ben pulled on a pair of Mark's flannel pants that hung loose around the waist. I found boots in the attic that almost fit. They didn't ask for anything, just accepted what was offered and stayed close to the walls. That night, I laid out fresh bedding in the back room while they sat on the couch in the living room side by side, not speaking. I kept thinking I should say something. That I should acknowledge the years, the loss, the impossible distance they had somehow crossed just by walking back up those stairs. But nothing I could have said would have made it easier, so I didn't force it. When I passed the old hallway closet, I saw that the music box was open again. I hadn't touched it since the week before. Its ballerina arm was bent and the key at the bottom had been turned halfway. I closed it gently and left it alone. Around 3 a.m, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I got up and found Lila standing by the front door, not looking at anything in particular. I asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. Just said, "It's too quiet." I understood what she meant. Silence had weight up here, the kind that pressed from the outside in. Underground it was different. Silence felt like safety. I told her she could leave the door open a while if it helped. She nodded once, then sat down in the recliner. When I woke again, she was asleep there, arms folded across her chest, breathing steady. I found Ben out by the shed, kneeling by the 3rd tunnel hatch. He had pulled the boards aside and was staring down into the dark. I called his name softly. He turned, didn't speak, then pointed to a corner where the snow had been pushed in. Someone had moved through there recently. Just one set of prints. Small, narrow stride. No boot tread. "It's hers," he said. I didn't ask how he knew. I could see it in his face he wasn't guessing. I called Detective Calhoun that afternoon, told him the kids were back. I didn't say how, he didn't ask, just told me to keep them safe. "Not everyone will be happy," he said. "You know that, right?" I said I did. Later that night, after dinner, I stepped outside for air and found a note taped to the windshield of Mark's truck. One line handwritten, "Not everyone wants the truth. Some survive because it stays buried." There was no signature, just that sentence and a photograph clipped to the corner. It was me about 8 years old holding Ben's hand in the snow, both of us smiling. It was a photo I'd never seen before. I brought it inside and showed it to them. Lila stared at it a long time, then reached out and traced the edge of her brother's mitten. This was after, she said, after the first winter. "Who took it?" I asked. She looked up slowly. "I think you did. I didn't remember, but something in her voice told me she wasn't wrong." Later that week, I went alone to visit my mother's grave. I brought a pine cone from the trail behind the cabin. Not because it meant anything, just because it came from here. I placed it on the headstone and sat for a while. I remembered I said, "I know why you didn't say more. The wind didn't move. The trees didn't bend." But I meant it. I forgave her. That night, Josh Ben asked me quietly, "Will you tell people I looked at him?" His face was thin but steadier now. He didn't have the shadows under his eyes anymore. I asked, "Do you want me to?" He didn't answer right away, just stared out the window for a while. Then he said, "Maybe one day. I didn't write a book. I didn't go to the press. I didn't hold a press conference. I just stayed. Painted the cabin, repaired the stairs. I let air move through the walls again. Most days they stayed inside, adjusting to noise, to time, to the strange way a clock actually ticks when you let it. Some nights I left small things by the tunnel entrances, granola bars, letters, clean socks. Not because I expected anyone to come back, just in case someone else ever needed to. Sometimes I'd hear it again, that low humming, soft and slow, like someone trying to remember a tune that kept slipping away. When it came, I'd pause whatever I was doing. Not to be afraid, just to listen. It was memory, not haunting, just something real echoing in the quiet. One morning, the mailbox had something inside. No stamp, no envelope, just a postcard. On the back, in neat handwriting, "Thank you for remembering." Then, below that, P.S. Check the Polaroid again. I ran back inside, pulled the photo from the frame. Looked again. This time, for the first time, my grandmother was smiling. Not a lot, just enough to change everything. I kept the photo on the windowsill right where the morning light could find it. The one where Grandma was finally smiling. It wasn't a wide smile, just a small, knowing crease at the edge of her mouth. But it changed how I looked at everything. I used to stare at that picture and see the absence. Now I see what stayed. Ben and Lila lived with us through the spring. We didn't talk about the tunnels much after that first week. There were too many layers, too many days no one wanted to unwrap. We focused on what we could touch, repairing the porch, chopping firewood, learning how to move through the world again. The simplest things were the hardest. Grocery stores, mailboxes, weather apps. Ben hated headlights. Lila couldn't sleep without the closet light on. But every morning she made coffee, folded, the blankets opened the front door like it was a ritual. I think that was her way of saying she wasn't hiding anymore. The state sent a counselor, then two. I sat with them the first few times, then stepped aside. It wasn't mine to carry anymore. The decision about whether to go public belonged to them. They chose quiet. No interviews, no articles, just a statement filed with the sheriff's office sealed. That was enough. Mark stayed through most of it. Helped build a new tool shed out back, reinforced the tunnel entrances so no one could stumble in again by accident. He never asked for thanks. One morning, before heading down the mountain, he left a note on the counter. Sometimes surviving means letting it stay buried. Sometimes it means telling someone where to look. That was the last I heard from him. But he left his jacket behind, hanging on the hook by the door like a promise to come back someday. Detective Calhoun retired not long after. Officially. Unofficially, he sent me one last package. No return address. Inside was a worn envelope filled with old photos and a napkin from the diner downtown. Written on the back, "They always thought you'd forget, but you didn't." I never told Ben or Lila about it. Some truths don't belong to anyone. By summer, they both moved on separately, carefully, but forward. Ben took a job helping with maintenance out at the lake cabins. Lila enrolled in night classes. They changed their last names. I helped with the paperwork. There was no funeral for Grandpa, no grave. Just a rock placed by the tunnel door with his initials scratched into it and a single pine branch laid across the top. We didn't say much that day. We didn't need to. I still live here. The cabin breathes easier now. Windows open, clock ticking. It doesn't feel like a secret anymore. Some days I take long walks into the trees. Other times I just sit on the back steps with coffee letting the wind pass through. And sometimes, especially when the first snow comes, I hear the humming again. Faint. Not frightened. Just familiar. It's strange, the things that stay. A red mitten, the smell of dust and pine, a voice saying, "You'll remember when it's time." I did. And it changed everything. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.